Everyone. All right, thanks, Kate. Hi, and yeah, thank you for joining us. Sorry, I'm having my computer was doing all sorts of cool things between my two screens, so I think I have everything all set to get started. So yeah, we have some questions that we received. We actually received quite a few questions from a lot of you. Thank you for sending those in and helping to guide this evening. We will take turns. Several of our members will take turns answering questions, and then if we don't get to all the questions, we will follow up at the end and talk about the way that we might get those answers to you. So I will just go ahead and jump in. Make sure I'm going to share. All right. Hold on. Are you seeing the slides?
We can see the first question, Sarah. Am I in the oak openings of the Great Black Swamp?
Okay. Sorry, I've clearly done online presentations in the past couple of years, but things are jumping all over for me. So thank you for letting me know. All right, so the first question that I am going to answer is, am I in the oak openings or the Great Black Swamp? And is that important to know? Okay, so I had planned to do some GIS work and make my own map, but I did not get to that. So I did use a map from, I'm a water quality planner with TMCOG, or Toledo Metropolitan Area Council of Governments. And we do look at the oak openings in the Great Black Swamp, at least their historic extents, when we are creating our 208 plan, which is our area-wide water quality management plan. So I did use a map that already existed, but I thought I would just give some context, some location. If you all haven't seen this before on a map, I'm sure you've seen a variety of different types of map that point out the oak openings and the Great Black Swamp. But just to give you an idea, this sandy area here is the oak openings region. And then this wetland area here would be the Great Black Swamp. So you can see where you are on the map as a way to kind of get started. All right, so the question is, how important is your place on the map? As most of us know, the oak openings in the Great Black Swamp look almost nothing like they did when they were at their full extent. So if you do live in one of those areas, you may be lucky enough to have a piece of one of those properties that really represents what we think of when we talk about the oak openings or the Great Black Swamp. More likely, you don't have a property that really neatly falls into one of those categories. And so what you really need to do is get to know your property. So if you think that you have a property that is a really great example of the oak openings or the Great Black Swamp, I would encourage you to reach out to local organizations like the Green Ribbon Initiative or Black Swamp Conservancy. They can help you to find resources and to know what you're looking for if you think that might be the case. But most likely you're going to go outside and look at your yard. You're going to look at the soil, so you'll pay attention to whether it's more clay, you know, if it's dense, if it holds water, or if you have sand where it drains really easily, you have a drier yard, or you probably have a combination of those somewhere along that gradient. So really go outside and look at your yard. This is just one resource. So this is on our Wild Ones website. And and this is a native plants by growing requirements list. So this will help you to look at your yard, determine if you have tree cover. So you need species that could survive in those woodland conditions with shade and canopy. If they're a little bit drier, you could go for that left side. If you have a wet woodland, there's options there. And then on along to a sunny and dry location. So those are some examples. You can go to Wild Ones Oak Openings, and that will give you some more to look at as far as those recommendations. And that is really all I have as far as that first question. Okay. And I stopped sharing, correct?
Yep.
All right. Pull up my agenda here. All right, and now we will move on to the next question. Kate will be taking this question, and it is, how do we keep grass from invading our native plant plot? So a little bit of background on this. It's around 3 years old, and we also want to let it expand, and the grass is making it difficult. They're looking for some natural weed deterrents. So,
okay. I wanted to let you know, Sarah, I made you co-host. So if you see people trying to get in, if you could admit them while I'm doing answering my question, that would be helpful.
I will do that.
All right. And I think you should be able to see my first slide. I will get to my second slide. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of go over the whole process. So before you put in a native garden in a lawn area, it's best if you can just thoroughly kill all the turf grass first. A lot of people will smother it either with, some black plastic or cardboard or something like that. Leave that on for an extended period of time during the growing season. And when the grass is thoroughly brown, then you can remove that. Or some people will just put, if they use cardboard, they'll just let the cardboard decompose. And you can lightly disturb the top layer to kind of break up the roots system to discourage the grass from growing back. That can be helpful. So once you get your area pretty well cleared of any turf grass, then that's, good time to start putting in your native plants. So things to remember, it's really important if you can learn how to identify the plants you're putting in as seedlings or as young shoots, so that early in the season you can start pulling out the stuff you don't want. And you don't want to do that unless you can really identify your native plants, because you might end up weeding out your native plants accidentally. And then, of course, on the reverse side of that is IDing unwanted plants. There are so many, if you're just starting out, there are so many different unwanted plants that can come in to your garden. And I'm avoiding using the word weeds because a lot of our native plants have weed in their name, such as milkweed and Joe Pye weed. So weeds aren't necessarily plants we don't want. Sometimes weeds are the plants we do want. So your unwanted grass and forbs, those are pretty easy to identify, to remove. And the other thing to keep in mind is that most turf grasses, and such as Kentucky bluegrass and I can't remember some of the other grasses we use in lawns. And also there are some opportunistic natives and non-natives that'll just come into an area that's been disturbed, it's been left unplanted. Queen Anne's lace and wood sorrel are a couple of good examples of that, but they don't compete very well. So once your native plants get established, the native plants themselves will kind of help control some of those unwanted weeds. I have a few links on this slide. This weed guide, the second one on the list, is helpful. It gives you a list of undesirable plants, and this is this is one place where you will see some of our desirable native plants listed as weeds. So, you know, you have to take that with a grain of salt. But there are a lot of the less desirable plants listed on this website that it'll help in IDing some of those plants. Learning the life cycle of your unwanted plants is also important. Annuals are pretty easy to control if you get them out of the ground before they flower and produce seed. Annual plants also are typically produce an abundance of seed because that's the only way they have to reproduce. So it really is important for the annual undesirable plants that you get those out of the ground before they start flowering. Biennials are similar. Biennials, example of those would be garlic mustard and mullein. They will produce a basal set of leaves their first year, and then they will send up a flower stalk the second year. And if you can learn to identify that basal set of leaves and get rid of those the first year, then you really don't have to worry so much about the flowering part of it. Plants like crabgrass and hairy bittercress are annuals, and those, if you can get those dug out before they start flowering, that's a better way to go. For unwanted perennial plants, you want to try and remove as much of the root system as possible. And this is all hand digging at this point. I'm just recommending hand pulling, hand digging. They will resprout from roots, you know, if there's a substantial part of the root left in the ground. If it's not possible to dig it out completely, that happens frequently, just keep cutting back the plant, the above ground part of the plant, and eventually you'll starve the roots of their energy and they won't be able to produce any more. You know, the plant will die. So a couple of examples. Canada thistle is a plant that is actually not from Canada at all. It is not native to North America. It has an extensive underground root system. Burdock is another one that is more of a clump forming plant, but it also has very extensive underground root system. So if you let those produce leaves and get pretty mature in the leaf stage and then cut it all back, and then it'll produce leaves again, cut it all back, repeat that several times through the season and make sure you don't ever let it flower. And then that will eventually kill the plant. But you have to remember to do it multiple times through the season to really get good control of the plant. And it might have to, you know, you might have to do that a couple of years before it will kill the plant. Basically, getting rid of unwanted plants is just a continuous job. You're never going to get rid of all the plants, all the unwanted plants. So they're going to pop up in your yard. Birds will bring seeds in, the wind will blow seeds in, so you're always going to be dealing with it. There is, also learn to identify the invasive plants and remove those as soon as possible. And I also have a link on my slide of the invasive plant list from the Ohio Invasive Plant Council. And that's got a lot of good resources on how to identify some of the invasive plants that are most problematic for Ohio. There are some unwanted plants that can help to identify your soil type, and it can help you figure out which native plants will naturally do well. And my first resource on my slide is from the Almanac, Farmer's Almanac. So it's geared more towards agriculture, but it does have some good information on some of those plants such as crabgrass. The description from this website says it grows where the soil has been depleted of nutrients and is low in calcium. It uses terms sweet and sour to talk about the soil alkalinity. And sweet is soil with a high pH that's more alkaline, and sour would be low pH or more acidic soil. So knowing, like just looking to see what weeds are coming up or what unwanted plants are coming up in your garden may help you figure out, well, if this plant is doing well, maybe I can find a native plant that I would want that will grow in a similar condition. If your garden is surrounded by lawn and you're ever reseeding your lawn, just be very careful not to let any of that lawn seed get into the native bed. And then installing edging, some kind of edging or physical barrier will certainly help keep the grass from spreading via roots into the garden. So I have some examples here. You can use flagstone, just some kind of black plastic edging that you put down into the ground, the stone edging, and then I have an example of just using mulch sort of as a border. This is from UT. And then this photo from Kitty Todd. We just use a flat-headed spade and edge around the garden area maybe a couple of times in the season, just to break that the grass roots and keep them from spreading into the bed. And again, it's an ongoing issue. Even when you have like this edging, it's a pretty wide, this is at my house, and it's a pretty wide flagstone border, but we still get grass popping up in between the stone. So you just have to keep after it. There's really no magic way to take care of, to keep plants from growing. They're going to grow wherever they can. So herbicide is always an option. There are a couple of different ways to apply herbicide. You can use the chemicals manufactured that are sold at stores, such as glyphosate, or there are some that are for specific to grass that won't kill broadleaf, so they won't kill many of the plants in your garden, but they'll kill grass. But if you have sedges or ornamental or grasses in your garden, then they certainly will kill those. So that's always a risk with using herbicides, any kind of herbicide, whether it's a manufactured herbicide or something, home remedy sort of herbicide. Be sure to always follow all the label directions carefully when using herbicide. Never use an herbicide for an off-label use, and always wear proper protective equipment when using herbicides. And keep in mind that using any type of herbicide, you run the risk of unintentional damage to your other plants. And there may be harm to insects and animals, but that has not been well studied. But these insects are eating the plants that have been sprayed with glyphosate maybe or something, so it could harm them as well. I've seen, people talk about using bleach or vinegar to promoted, to use as natural weed deterrents. They're killing plants, so they're still toxic. They can still be harmful to the environment, especially bleach. And when used in strong enough concentrations to kill a plant, that makes them, even more potentially damaging. Vinegar can change the pH of your soil. So the way bleach and vinegar work is to kill the leaves, and so the plants are still going to resprout from the roots. So you're still going to have to reapply. They're most effective for annuals, but even annuals may not be totally killed by either bleach or vinegar. And the other thing, I found this, the last link on my slide, this vinegar, comparing using vinegar to glyphosate. And the article actually isn't trying to promote one over the other. It's just sort of laying out the facts. But I did find it interesting that household vinegar is typically a 5% acetic acid mixture. And in order to effectively kill a plant, you need a 20% acetic acid vinegar. So you can't really just take your household vinegar and very effectively use that to kill plants. And then there's another method, which is using like some sort of a propane or butane torch to flame unwanted plants. And so that's another method that doesn't kill the roots either. So that has to be done repeatedly. And that's kind of like how we use fire to suppress, natural controlled burns in like the Metro Parks and the Nature Conservancy use controlled burns to control some of the unwanted plants. It's effective on some plants and not as effective on others. So those are some of the ways you can, some of your options as far as, using some kind of herbicide or something other than digging the plants out. You really want to avoid using any kind of pre-emergent. Pre-emergents are often recommended for crabgrass, and pre-emergents are not they're not selective, so they will stop all seed from germinating. So your native plants aren't going to be able to fill in and spread out as you want them to if you use a pre-emergent. And then you can also learn to appreciate some of the unwanted plants and what they can provide. Wood sorrel is one that a lot of people don't really like in their garden. I don't really like having it in my garden, but I also have learned to live with it somewhat. It does fix nitrogen into the soil, so it does, improve the soil. Dandelions can provide early flowers for some pollinators. And one plant that in particular that we struggle with a lot of the Kitty Todd demo garden is sheep sorrel. It is not a native plant, but it is a nectar source for the American copper butterfly. So, even though plants may not be native or may not be desirable, they may also either be closely enough related to our native plants, or if they're native, they may, provide benefits that, we don't really think about. So, and again, once your native plants really get established, your weeding efforts will go way down. I mean, if you've got such as my garden over here that is pretty completely full, there's not much bare dirt at all, then you don't really have a place for any weed seeds to germinate. Using mulch early on before your garden has really filled in is another way to kind of help control weeds until your native plants get a chance to get established. And that is all I have for that question. So I will stop sharing and turn it back to Sarah.
Thanks, Kate. We will go ahead then and move on to the next question. John will be answering this question. And this was about beneficial insects in a native garden. So this question asked for a couple of examples of what might attract them. So John, you can go ahead with your answer.
Okay. I don't have anything to share for this, but so there's many beneficial insects in gardens. I'm sure we all know most of them, but lady beetles would be the most popular, and the adults and larvae are predatory and help control aphids and thrips, mites, small caterpillars, and other soft-bodied insects. And the larvae are so voracious sometimes, they're also known as aphid lions. And there's many native species in Ohio, and then there's a few introduced species. A good source for ladybugs would be like OSU Extension. They used to have a program where you could monitor them and see what you have in your yard, but there's a lot of good information on their website. Another bug would be assassin bugs, and the adults prey on flies, mosquitoes, which is good, beetles, spiders, larger caterpillars, leafhoppers, and weevils. And the larvae also feed on aphids and other insect eggs. And lacewing bugs are also beneficial, and they will come to lights at night. If you ever do mothing at night, you'll get a lot of lacewings. And the adults are not really predaceous. They feed mainly on honeydew and nectar and pollen, but the larvae have big appetites, and they like aphids and insect eggs, thrips, mealybugs, whitefly larvae, and other small caterpillars too. And they're also known as aphid lions, just because of their appetite. And then another one that we probably don't think about too much would be ground beetles, and the adults prey on other beetles and larvae. They'll also eat aphids and mites, ants, even root maggots, cutworms, slugs, and even sometimes snails. And beetles are also important pollinators. So they're good to have. And other beneficial insects would be spiders, bees, wasps, flies, dragonflies, damselflies, fireflies, damsel bugs, ambush bugs, wheel bugs, praying mantids, and butterflies. So there's a lot of great insects that visit your garden, and you want to promote them. And they're beneficial in both their larval form and their adult form. And they eat hundreds of aphids each day. They control other pests and other insects in your gardens and yard. So the way to promote them would be just to plant a variety of native plants. They like, a lot of the insects like smaller flowers arranged in clusters. So milkweed would be good, coneflower, asters, goldenrods, any of those would be, great choices. And you want to plant something that is in bloom at different times of the year also. So plant something that blooms in June, such as wild bergamot, something like that. Early goldenrod is a good one. Penstemon is a good one, or foxglove beard tongue. So, and leave the leaf litter, and put a little brush pile in. Give them a habitat, give them a home. They need the leaf litter in the winter, and the brush piles, they'll use the rotting wood to lay eggs in. So, create a bug habitat, around the base of your trees. Leave a 2 or 3 foot strip, around your trees, and just let that grow. Put native plants in there, native grasses, and then that way too, the bugs have a place to dig into the ground. You're not mowing right up against trees or anything like that, because that'll compact the soil and they can't dig into it. So, and don't use insecticides, even aphid soaps, mosquito fogs. They're not just going to pick out mosquitoes. It's going to kill everything. So learn to put up with that, and maybe plant some beneficial things that bring insects in to eat mosquitoes, and promote stuff like that. So that's all I have for that question.
Okay, thanks, John. Next up, we have Diane. Diane will answer the question, if plants have rhizomes and seeds, will both produce new plants?
Okay, so the short answer to that is yes, both will produce new plants, but there is a difference, a little bit of difference between the different methods. So rhizomes, first off, are stem structures that grow horizontally, either on the ground or below the surface of the soil. And they develop from axillary buds, and they can send up new sprouts and new roots, going 2 different directions. The rhizomes are used to store some of the starches, proteins, and other nutrients used by the plants. And the stems, of course, their role is to transport water and nutrients. So if you get new plants from rhizomes, you are getting the same plant. There's no genetic diversity between the plants when they grow from the rhizomes. Some native plants that have rhizomes include the grasses, iris, both common, Sullivan's, and world milkweeds, Canada anemone, wild ginger. You see their rhizomes right on the surface of the soil. Heath and big leaf aster, wild strawberry, wild geranium, woodland and western sunflowers, Virginia waterleaf, rose mallow, bergamot, obedient plant, mayapple, Solomon seal, zigzag, goldenrod, bellwort, and many other plants will reproduce by rhizomes. Some of those rhizomes are pretty aggressive, like in common milkweeds and wild ginger, and others not quite so aggressive. Those plants will also produce seeds, and seed production requires the pollen from anthers to fall on the stamen, or that come from the stamen, and travel down the style to the ovary and fertilize the ovule. in another plant. And this brings the genetic diversity or the genetic material from two different plants, thus increasing diversity of the seed. We had Denise Gehring gave me some information that she did an informal study between milkweed seeds, rhizomes, and plugs, planting all three. And at the end of the season, she found that the rhizomes grew most quickly into hardy individuals, then the plants from the seeds, and finally the transplanted plugs. But again, the rhizomes would have the least genetic diversity. So it's always good in a way to use 2 or 3 different growing methods in order to increase the propagation of plants within your yard. So hopefully that's answered that question.
Awesome. Thanks, Diane. And we haven't gotten any other questions in the chat box. So I am watching the chat box in case anything comes up there. All right. And now we're back to me. I am going to talk about some seasonal native garden tasks. So all the fun work that we love doing. I do have some more slides to share for this, so I will get that pulled up. All right. See the seasonal title slide? Perfect. Yep. All right. So I'll just start with spring since that's where we are in the year, or almost. I'm just gonna say we're there because I'm ready. So it's spring. You're welcome. So one of the first questions, right, going into spring is whether or not you're going to clean up your garden. So that can have all kinds of different considerations for you. So you may have a very strict HOA. You might have, things of that nature that you need to worry about. You also might think about, like John mentioned, if you left your leaves, it's a really nice thing to rake into your garden beds in the fall. So if those are still in there, you might think about the fact that some native insects might take a little bit longer to fully mature and then be able to leave that leaf litter. So you might want to just keep those in your garden bed. And then also looking at native plant sales. So we have a native plant sale coming up in May, and there are all kinds of other options in the area. We do try to share that. So if you're on our social media or if you check on our website regularly, also the Toledo-Lucas County Rain Garden Initiative, that will also have updated information on plant sales. Watch for unwanted plants. So Kate, while you were talking, I actually went through and changed all of my slides so that they don't say weeds, because I do like them. So yeah, I might have missed some, but they should all be changed. But yeah, start looking for plants that you don't want in your garden. So you can start weeding as soon as things start popping out. They are a little bit more difficult, for me anyways, to identify when they're really tiny, but Kate shared some of those resources that can help you identify. In the spring, there are some seeds that are appropriate to spread, or you can plant the plants that you get at one of the native plant sales, or that you have germinated on your own. So this is a time when you'll start planting some species. If you have woody species and they look to have some damage from over the winter, so if there are parts that aren't leafing out when the rest of the plant or the shrub or tree is, you can prune those back at this time. Mulch, question mark. So that could be the leaves that you already have in your garden bed, utilizing those. You could use traditional mulch. You can start, if you're planting, you can start moving towards using things like sedges or grasses as a green mulch. So to fill in areas where you don't necessarily have flowering plants. You could use other plants to fill in those areas. I actually one time kept forgetting to get mulch, and I had some areas that just weeds kept popping up in them. So I actually put some firewood in those empty spots, and then the next year actually had morel mushrooms growing in my flower bed. So sometimes when you get desperate, some fun things happen. And then also just enjoy your spring plants. So if you already have a native garden going and you've got things coming out, just make sure you take time during this time of some more intense work to enjoy it. All right, and then summer. So, oh, and I did want to say at the beginning, none of these lists are exhaustive. Of course, if you've had a garden, you know that there's a million things to do with them. So if any other questions come up, we can try to address those, or we might with some resources after the fact. All right, so during the summer, if you have woody species and you have that soft new growth, if you're interested in propagating those in order to have more of those species, you could do that during this time. This is late spring as well too. Water is needed. So if you planted new plants, they're probably going to need water in those hot summer months. If you have established plants, one of the really great things about native plants is that they probably won't need to be watered that often unless we have an extended dry period or a drought. Keep removing those unwanted plants and revisit mulch as needed. So like I said, I eventually stuck some firewood in my garden bed, but you might notice some gaps throughout the season that you want to fill in. So just kind of keep an eye on things as they progress. You can look out for pests as the season goes on. Care for your early spring plants. So this is where you get to start deciding what you're going to do as far as cleanup during and towards the end of a growing season. So do you want to leave seed heads? Do you want to cut the plants back? Do you want to leave some stems for insects? So yeah, look into what you want to do, starting with your early spring plants when they are past their growing time. And again, enjoy your work. I'm going to sorry, I did notice some things popping up in the chat. So I just want to make sure it's nothing I should take care of right now. Looks like we will come back to those. Okay, I will move on. So fall, again, fall is a good time for those native plant sales. There are a few places locally that have those, and again, just keep an eye out for those announcements. This is a good time to plant also, just like in the spring. If you have any unwanted plants and pests, obviously you want to keep taking care of those. And still thinking about that clean or not to clean. So this is the time of year when things really start to slow down. You want to balance that, just like with the cleanup in the early spring. You want to balance, you know, the aesthetic that you want with the benefits that you would like to have from your garden, and then also, you know, if there are any constraints as far as your neighborhood or your surroundings. You could collect seeds. So like I said, you can decide whether or not you want to leave those seed heads. If you want to leave them for animals, you can choose to do that. Then you could also start collecting seeds from your garden in order to have those and germinate or give away to your friends, or sprinkle in places that you notice need some native plants. And planting. So trees and shrubs are popular choices for fall. So if you're looking to add some native trees or shrubs, they enjoy those cooler temperatures and the rainfall that we typically get. And then going into fall and winter, you would start pruning trees and shrubs for the year. All right, and then winter, again, the cleaning question. Just keep revisiting that as you go. Pruning is still taking place. Take note of species. So if you leave, any of the vegetative material that hangs out or the woody material, if you leave seed heads, just notice. I notice a lot of birds and things visit and get those materials. So that's kind of a fun thing to take note of. Once things kind of die back and you've probably trimmed back, you can get a good look at any of the hard materials or edging that you've installed. So you can see if those need any replacement. Maybe they've been hidden behind plants for a few months and you can really see if there's anything that needs some attention. This is also the time where you would winter sow seeds. So you can do that directly outside, or there's, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the milk jug method or other approaches to winter sow seeds. So that's something that can keep you gardening in the winter. And then I started keeping a garden journal for my vegetable garden and my native plants. It's really cool for me anyways to look back and see what's happened in the past year and then kind of get an idea of some things that you may want to do differently or keep doing in the next year. So those are, like I said, not exhaustive, but those are just some of the tasks that you could attend to seasonally. I'm going to look in the chat. Oh, thank you, fellow board members, for answering, I think, all of the questions in the chat.
I'm currently working on the sedge question. I think that was the last question. So I'm typing that in right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, I will stop sharing then.
I'm looking at the local oak openings genotype seeds and plants are limited. I don't think they're very limited. We have a number of seeds that are available through the local wild ones oak openings region, and the seeds come from members, so they are, I would assume, pretty much local genotype. Just need to get a hold of either myself or John. We have quite a number of seeds, especially available to members.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so then we can move on to the next question that we have scheduled. And Adele will be answering this question on how to control invasive poison hemlock.
Okay, so I got a lot of my information from Freya. Oh, I don't have any slides, so for this question. But anyway, I got a lot of my information from Freya Bernstein, who works at the Black Swamp Conservancy. She deals with a lot of invasive species removal. So poison hemlock is a member of the carrot family, and it's easy to confuse with Angelica, Queen's Anne's lace, wild parsnip. The easiest way to differentiate at a glance is that poison hemlock has like a purple blotching on the stem. It looks like the stem's been splattered by purple paint. And also the stems are hairless and smooth, unlike some of the other carrot family plants, which have like a little bit of like fine, like haired stems. Poison hemlock grows in ditches a lot. And every part of the plant is highly toxic to mammals when ingested. So if you have poison hemlock growing on your property, there is hope. Freya wanted to stress that you can get rid of it. especially since it's biennial, it might take some patience to eradicate it, but it can be done. Because it's so toxic, the best way is probably to use herbicides. You can just spray it. This is a situation that would be warranted. And I know, like Kate stressed this, you need to follow the labels and wear proper protection. So if you go the herbicide route, you would need to get a broadleaf, like foliar spray and spray the leaves. And the best time to spray the plant would be right before it flowers. It flowers in late May and early June, so you need to spray it before then. And if you spray before it flowers, then you won't be impacting pollinators, and you would also be able to stop the plant from possibly setting seed before it dies. So you can also dig up the plant or cut it if you don't want to deal with herbicides. If you do this, you need to be careful not to come in contact with the sap. So you would need to wear like some thick chemical resistant gloves, long sleeves, pants, and eye protection. You can come into contact with the toxin through ingestion, but also it can get in your eyes or in your nose and possibly cause you harm in that manner. So a couple of places that I saw also suggested that you wear like a bandana or something to keep from breathing in any of the spray. A weed whacker might not be strong enough to cut through thicker stems, and also you might get too much spray from like liquid from the plant. So a machete is the best suggestion according to Freya. So it's important to do this once again before the plant goes to seed. And if you cut the top of the plant off, you might also want to like dig up the root system. And if you don't dig up the root system, then you should apply herbicide to the stump probably. That would keep the plant from sending up new flowers after being cut if it still had the energy to do that. And if you go the route of digging up the plant or cutting the plant, the best option for disposal at that point is to put it in the trash and send it to the landfill. It's not a good idea to compost it because the toxins don't break down very well, even when the plant is dead and even when it's dried. And you should not burn it. Seeds live in the soil for like 3 to 5 years, and like I said before, it sprouts biennially. So it might take a few cycles to get rid of completely, but if you're kind of dedicated, you can get it done. And that is all I have.
All right, thank you. Okay, and I don't see anything new in the chat. So we will move on to our last question, and that will be answered again by John. And this is about water features in a native garden. So some examples of different types and then pros and cons of those.
Okay. You do have a slide to share on this, Sarah, so.
Okay.
Or Kate or whoever.
I think if you go to.
Yep, I see it now. So, okay, I get to that point, I'll share it. So, so yeah, this was kind of a tough question because there are a lot of different water features. Really, I mean, obviously it's anything from large to small, but I think it really depends on what you want and how much work you want to do and put into it. What is your goal and what species do you want to attract? A water feature for birds would be different than something for amphibians. And do some research, talk to people about ongoing maintenance and other issues that they've experienced. My best advice would be to start simple. A bird bath or a simple water dish is a great start. They're easy to clean. It provides a great benefit for birds and insects. A shallow dish with flat rocks is great for butterflies and insects. Don't make it too deep, even for birds. They want something to perch on. Some larger water features would include, you know, like a small fountain and rocks that sit on the ground. You could have a water feature where you dig into the ground and install a plastic liner. These would be the most expensive to install and maintain. So again, do some homework on it, you know, make sure it's something you want to pursue. And some of these will have a pump that circulates water. And keep in mind that these may need electricity or some kind of solar charger to run the pump. There are some circulators are a simple drip hose, and then there's some that, you know, are a small pump with an aerator. But any water feature you have that circulates waters will definitely attract birds. They love the sound of the water moving. You'll also attract frogs, amphibians, and even mammals, sometimes raccoons, something like that, even deer. You know, another, and this is my favorite water feature because my yard is very wet. A natural low spot in your yard could be turned into a rain garden, a small vernal pool. You know, leave some organic material such as leaves and sticks in there and see what you get. Plant some natives, put some iris or something in there, you know, something that loves water. And just enjoy the birds and pollinators and see what other things visit it, like the insects and, you know, even a small rain garden or water loving plants near a downspout. You know, that's another thing that I do in my yard. It's real easy to do, you know, plant some cardinal flower and blue lobelia near a downspout and just sit back and watch the hummingbirds and bees that visit it. There's, you know, for more information too, I would say definitely do some homework. The National Wildlife Federation has a great resource. If you go to nwf.org and do Garden for Wildlife, they have a whole section on water and different types, you know, what you can do differently. And visit the Rain Garden Initiative. You know, there's some great ideas on there. And our website too. That's going to tell you kind of like what Sarah showed earlier, the different plants and the different growing conditions that they like. And then I will share my simple water feature in my yard. And it's simply a water dish on my patio. Hopefully you guys can see that, right? Okay, so the top left picture, that's a brown thrasher that came up to the water dish, and I just use an old skillet. It works perfect. Some of the birds like to perch right on the handle. I have deer that walk up and drink out of it. You can see the fawn. Usually the mom is right there drinking with it. And there's a rose-breasted grosbeak. There's a eastern bluebird. There's a blue jay taking a bath, Baltimore Orioles. And I'll even have sometimes the catbirds will come up and take a bath. Flickers, they like water too. And then last fall, I had a dish like the bottom where the blue jay is, a dish like that by my bird feeder up in the air, and I had a red-tailed hawk perch in it and then hunt chipmunks at the bird feeder. So, so just anything simple, provide fresh, clean water is great for birds and insects and butterflies. And that's all I have for that question.
Okay. Well, wow, we are just about perfect on our time. I think 7 questions is the right number. So yeah, before we head out for the evening, I just had a few things that I wanted to mention. Our next program will be on Tuesday, April 12th, and I'm super excited about it. It's called Understanding and Even Appreciating Tree Galls. This is with Joe Boggs from OSU Extension. So the registration link is in our newsletter, this month's newsletter, on our social media and on our website. So you can take a look at that. Yeah, I'm very excited. I love gulls. That's part of my retirement plan one day, is to learn a lot more of those when I have time. Also in the chat box, I noticed that Kate posted at least, or shared at least one website. And then I added a couple in there. So we'll hang on for a couple minutes once we wrap up. That way that people can grab things out of the chat box if you want to. Also, this will be recorded and shared. I am not sure on the timeline of that though, but you'll be able to watch this recording. And then, so I mentioned earlier that we did have quite a few more questions, aside from the ones that we answered tonight. We, needed to be able to plan ahead and get people to answer those and also have some prep time. So the additional questions, we will share answers in one way or another. We could address it in our newsletter. So you might see an article in the coming months. We could share it through email as a follow-up if there's anything that we want to follow up on. And then also make sure you follow us on social media, where we might address some of those questions moving forward. So, all right, I don't see anything else in the chat box. I'll hang out for like another minute or so if you want to grab any of those websites or any of the answers out of the chat box. Otherwise, thank you, everyone. Thanks to all the board members who answered questions.